So we make decision makers aware of the cost of persistence. These are all elements we can use to reduce some costs. So knowledge management, well, what is it? It's a fancy term, and believe it or not, there are actual degrees that people can now get in knowledge management and other terms that are used surrounding that. These are systems that increase sharing of knowledge within an organization, right? And often tacit knowledge is a real bitch, because tacit knowledge is things that people learn over a long period of time that's not well documented, that's like carried around in their head and carried around as part of their organizational habits. It's very difficult to tap into and very difficult then to transmit to others, right? It's gained through experience. One example that I have of this is when I was at the second paper mill, when I was at the Wallula mill, Carol Alt was the production planner, and she decided the paper machine generates a reel of paper that was about 16 feet wide and just huge in diameter, right? Like 6-7 feet in diameter, and that reel of paper is what comes off the paper machine. But you can't ship it, you can't send it to a customer, no one can use it. So now it has to be cut into smaller rolls, and that's through a process of rewinding. But the idea is different customers want different size rolls. So how do you take a big reel of paper and most efficiently cut it to meet the customer's needs with the least waste and do it on time? This is a bitch. This is an insanely complex process to maximize the profitability of the paper machine, right? And meet the needs of the customers. Well, Carol was amazing at this. She'd been doing it for like 20 years, and she was amazing. But the thing is, she was heading towards retirement. And while I was there banging around at Wallula Mill, trying to kind of find my feet, they said, we want you to learn Carol's process. In fact, we want you to flowchart it so that we can either use your flowcharts to train new people to do it as well as Carol does it, or, and I hate to say it, that we might be able, you and the computer programmer might be able to create programs, right, computer programs that make the determination and fill the orders. So I sat down with Carol, and we worked 3 weeks, and the flowcharts are still incomplete, because there's so many decisions she made and so many considerations that she had forgotten. So we would constantly be exploring, and I said, well, Carol, why do you do that? And she said, I don't know, I just always, and I said, well, and then we'd have to dig deep, and we'd have to be able to process model it. And it was fascinating. Extremely complex process, but the idea was so that we can transmit this knowledge to others, right? Now, explicit knowledge is easily put into words and explained to others. So that's kind of the simpler things we do, the more straightforward things we do. It's important to know the difference and how to be able to train people in tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, or, as I was kind of describing, can we translate tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge? Interesting challenge for people who like that kind of stuff. Okay, you're going to get a chance to flowchart, so fear not. And you can either gasp or you can say hooray. We will be eating soon enough, cerebellum. So, explicit knowledge can be shared via conventional channels, reports, documentation, etc., and that's where we want to go. Now, shift gears. Let's talk decision-making styles. There's a lot of different research on decision-making styles. I just kind of honed in on this as an example. Two intersecting continuums intersect to create four styles. So first of all, what's a person's value orientation? And we determine that. And what is their tolerance for ambiguity as opposed to their need for certainty? And you can test yourself. Now, I'll give you a caveat here, because I was looking online for a test, and this decision-making style is pretty cool, right? And you don't have to do it. It's optional if you're curious, but you will need to give up your email address to get the full report. It did tell me my style, my strengths, my weaknesses, and interestingly, what others might say about me and my style, how I'm perceived in the workplace. So I thought it was cool, and I gave up my email address, and yeah, I'm getting sent, some 1 or 2 messages a day, whatever. But I think it's interesting, so check it out if you want. You can click that link. It's embedded in the PowerPoint lecture that you have, so check it out. What are the 4 decision styles then? Well, Some people have high-level task and technical concerns. Other people are people, so they're more people and social-oriented. Notice that's one continuum. So what is the person's values? Do they value task and technical, or do they value people, right? And then the other is, to what extent can you tolerate ambiguity, right? Or to what extent do you really need certainty? You have low tolerance ambiguity. Where you're placed then is in any one of 4 quadrants. And notice it's kind of a broad analysis, but so here is the analytical. This is information and alternatives is what these people tend to generate. So they allow for multiple, right? Notice analytical information and alternatives. So they tolerate some ambiguity because they're allowing for alternatives, right? Now. But notice it's task-oriented because it's analytical. But let's suppose you have high tolerance for ambiguity and you're kind of a people person, then conceptual, you're more likely to take a broad perspective. Now, if you're people but low tolerance, then behavioral opinions and options and discussion is where you want to go. You want to be with people, but you want to keep the ambiguity low. And finally, if you're about low ambiguity and technical, it's directive action oriented, and the decision-making style is to probably consider very few possibilities to stay away from the ambiguity and at least create the illusion of certainty. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about hedgehogs and foxes. And this is my first advisor at Ohio State. Coming to Ohio State Social Psychology Department, I didn't realize, I didn't appreciate how cool it was. To have Phil Tetlock as my initial advisor, and I remember Phil left in my 3rd year. Yeah, and you have to anticipate that when you go to graduate school, that your advisor might not stay forever, right? And what are you going to do if they don't? Is there someone else you can work with, or what options are available? Now, in my case, Ori was a 4th-year student of Phil's, Beth was 5th, Amanda was 2nd, I was 3rd, and Phil asked, he said, look, he says, I'm taking a job at Berkeley. And I said, what are you going to do at Berkeley? And he says, well, I'm going to go to Berkeley and I'm going to be the chair of the Haas School of Business. And I'm going, holy shit, that's big time. And he says, well, yeah, you know. And he says, do you want to go with me? And I'm like, oh, geez, Haas Business School. Wow, that would be pretty awesome. Berkeley, that would be pretty awesome. But you know, my wife's got a job. We're embedded here. We bought a house. I don't see how we can pull this off. And ultimately, I want my degree to be in social psychology, not in business. So I don't want to shift gears. And I don't know what it would cost to shift gears, right? In terms of time. And I don't know if we can even afford to live in Berkeley. So I said, Phil, you know what? I'd love to, but I can't. Thank you for the offer. And then I went down the hallway to Marilyn Brewer and said, Marilyn, you looking for an advisee? And she says, well, I was waiting for you. So that was cool. So, but Phil is a pretty well-established author. He's got countless research articles. He works in all kinds of areas. He loves political science and social psychology. He loves business. This is one of his books, Expert Political Judgment. I love the title, Expert Political Judgment. How good is it, and how can we know? And you want to talk about analyzing decision-making styles and analyzing decisions, quality. Man, this guy is top-notch, right? So let's look at his description of hedgehogs versus foxes. Hedgehogs possess one big theory. Foxes employ less comprehensive theories but are flexible in their application, right? Also captured in the concept of integrative complexity, where one sees a large number of variables and seeks to understand the relationship between those variables. So hedgehogs probably make decisions more quickly and more easily, are more action-oriented, but wedded to maybe a more singular point of view. Foxes, on the other hand, are adaptive, flexible, but sometimes might not be as strong in their decision-making process because it's harder for them to make a decision. They're selecting from a greater array of options. Probably the best of both worlds is to have these two people working together, right? Sensitivity to context, boundary conditions allows for more nuanced and case-specific application of theories. And if there's one thing I learned so much from Phil, but the idea of boundary conditions. we're talking about a phenomenon that exists, but under what circumstances? And if the circumstances change, does the phenomenon change? Anyway, if you want to see more on Ted Locke, I've got a link to his decision making, and he's at Pittsburgh. He's at Pennsylvania now with his wife Barb Mellers, and they lead a huge decision making sciences collaborative. So, big time on that. Now, let's talk ethics for a minute, because probably we should not, avoid that, right? Constance Bagley gives us this ethical decision tree, and let's just move through it. Is the proposed action legal? Is probably the first question we should look at when we're looking at an implementation. And if the answer is no, then don't do it, right? But yes, does it maximize shareholder value? And if no, would be ethical? No? Then follow the tree. So I know this is hard to read. You guys look at it on your own screen or look at it in your notes. But ultimately, right, most of the time, the answer is don't do it. But, ultimately, is it legal? Does it maximize shareholder value? Yes. Is it ethical? Yes. Then go ahead and do it. But if it fails that, then consider not doing it, and consider not doing it strongly. So ethics belongs in decision making as well, although in this current day and age it seems like much decision making seems to be completely devoid of ethics and simply profit maximization. When do you guys think we should maybe use groups to make decisions? Well, hey, if additional information would increase the quality of decision and people in the group are able to get that information, then use a group, right? If acceptance is important, then group-made decisions are probably easier to sell to the people implementing them. It's not a single manager saying, I decided this is what we should do. Hey, I had a team come up with a solution, and then it sounds more palatable quite often to people. Right? If people can be developed through their participation, then by all means form a group and be a people developer. And I'm hoping that a lot of you guys look to do that as leaders, is that you incorporate as many people as you can to educate people and increase their skill sets, right? So, advantages, disadvantages of group-aided decision making. Well, look at the advantages. Simple list, greater pool of knowledge, different perspectives perhaps. Unless we selected people to be homogenous, and then we got groupthink going on, right? Greater comprehension, increased acceptance, and it operates as a training ground. Those of you who are interested in being people developers. Disadvantages, though, often when you bring a group together, then you see social pressure at work. You maybe see domination by a vocal few, and the other people don't really have a chance, and that's the value of the gatekeeper, one of those roles, the maintenance role we talked about in the last lecture. Log rolling. All right, most people ask me, what the hell is log rolling, Mark? Well, log rolling is when me and another person are in this committee, on this team, and we have personal grudges, right? And then we use the team as a vehicle to settle our grudges or play out our combat. So that's log rolling. Now, log rolling actually derives, and I don't know, don't try it at home. Let me put it that way. I actually worked at a lumber mill for 3 years in Northern California, and I got a chance to do a little log rolling, and I will say, don't do it at home. How does it work? Well, this is back when they used to transport logs on the water in a stream, and then they'd all get to a pond, right? And all the logs would get in a pond. What do you do to log roll? You get two people on a log. So I'm standing here, my competitor stands next to me, and then we start rolling the log. That is, the log will roll in the water as we move. So we sit there and we move like this, right? And the log's rolling, and we can roll it faster, and you have to move faster, or we can move it slower, or we can stop it, right? And someone falls off. That's log rolling. Dangerous competition, because there's usually not one log in the pond. The pond's filled with logs, and when you fall off that log, you're going to probably crack your skull and drown. So don't try it at home. But notice what it is. It's a mano-a-mano competition that has nothing to do with the project, and it interferes with exploration or implementation. Goal displacement. That is, people shift their desired goal, shift the team goal for their own desired goal. Right? And then groupthink, as we already discussed. So homework 5 is upon us, right? And what are we going to look at? please describe a way that the team members and or team leader can maximize 5 of the listed advantages. This is 1A to 1E on your worksheet. So you might want to split it up where each of you takes one, however you want to do this, right? Then do the same for minimizing the impact of disadvantages and describe your plan for each on your worksheets, right? So we take the 5 advantages and say, hey, this is a way I would work within a group, right, so that we maximize the advantages of the group work. The other half of it then is how can we minimize the disadvantages? And what I'm looking for you guys, you leaders and you potential leaders, when you're in a team, both the advantages and disadvantages can accrue. What can you do? How can you effectively manage that group so that you maximize your advantages and minimize your disadvantages, right? And as promised, I want to know how you're tracking, who did what on this assignment, so you're going to explain that as a portion of the assignment, part of the accountability manipulation to diminish the potential for social loafing. Got it? And if you want to ask questions, what are you going to do? I would think that you're going to come to office hours, right? Or you're going to come to our Zoom session and we'll move through it. Check the assignment section in Carmen for due dates. So let's talk a little bit about group versus individual performance. Groups are less efficient. There's no two ways about it. Me by myself, I can make a decision, boom, it's done. Some decisions are painfully slow in coming in groups, right? Everyone has to say their piece. Everyone wants to argue, go back and forth. It can be tedious, but I still maintain it's likely to make better decisions. Groups are more confident in their decision. Look, this was a group decision, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was a better decision, right? There's no correlation there necessarily. Group size is negatively correlated with decision quality. So again, 4 to 6 people is about optimum, depending on the expertise required and the diversity suggested. Decision accuracy, better with greater knowledge and group leader evaluative ability, right? So one thing about being a leader is, and like I was talking about, you know, the role of quality process advisor. What processes are we using to make these decisions? And are those processes of the highest quality? Are we satisficing? Are we employing heuristics to bring up those terms? We have to minimize the satisficing in the use of heuristics, right? And normative decision models and acknowledge bounded rationality, bring all these terms together to improve the quality of our decision. But we have to know that stuff before we can monitor it and make suggestions to avoid it. Is there unique information held by group members might facilitate better decisions, at least for familiar groups? And often diverse groups then really benefit with this, right? Because we can say, well, in my experience, right, and they might have experiences that no one else shares and can be very informative. Individual environment interaction. The meaning of an environment on the individual is a product of their perception of that environment. So we're getting really social psychological here. An environment will be perceived as facilitating or inhibiting creativity based on the perceiver's characteristics. So there's no kind of way to assess an environment, right, objectively necessarily. That we have to acknowledge that people will make subjective perceptual evaluations of their environment and what those environments mean to them. So regardless of the intention of the engineer of that environment, it's the subjective perception that rules the day. So if we were to organize organizational theories, right, we could look at measures of organizational creativity. What type of organizational climate, for example, fosters creativity? So notice we have a criteria, creativity, and then we can measure different organizational environments in their ability to attain or inhibit creative solutions. Use of teams and the effect of the presence of conspecifics. To what extent does that make a difference? Certain environments will support the use of teams to a greater extent than other environments. And what's a conspecific? You know, I think I'd just leave you to look that up. One of my favorite words. What about leadership theories? How does that then apply to decision making? So, What are some measures, for example, of organizational creativity? Well, what's the return on investment? We engage in a creative project. What does that return in terms of investment? And this is a very standard business metric, right? Many people think ROI is the key. Other people are not as interested in this depending on their kind of individual philosophy in a business context. Entrepreneurship, right? So to what extent does an organization allow for and facilitate entrepreneurship as associated to creativity? Innovation and innovation adoption. Publications might be another way, right? And notice that this is one that's used often in academia, but also in research organizations. Expert judgment, and how do they evaluate the situation? Supervisor and self-ratings are another way to look at this. Okay. Let's break it here, and we'll come back for part 3.